Hey, it's Chris from Liege Games. You see this shirt? It says Train Insane. I need like a board game insane. Or play board game insane. Anyway, so I had a chance this past week to break in my tabletop simulator virginity. I was able to play Fall of the Mountain King from the guys over at Burnt Island Games. And so I got to experience what it was like, a little bit about it, and just sort of what the general feel was. So I thought I'd just put a little bit of an impression out there, give you a little bit of an overview, give you some of my first thoughts, pros, cons, a little bit of everything. Just in case you guys are wondering, because it is launching on June 1, so we are less than a month away from the Kickstarter, and because the previous game, now I say previous game made, but this one, Fall of the Mountain King, is actually a prequel in the universe of In the Hall of the Mountain King. In the Hall of the Mountain King, you are rebuilding the Hall of the Mountain King. In the Fall of the Mountain King, it is the literal fall. The gnomes are invading and taking it over and kicking you out. I mean, it's sort of, and this is the first sort of point I'll put out there, it sort of reminds me of a reverse Spirit Island, if you will. You are playing it, you are interacting, the gnomes are invading like the developers and the foreigners in Spirit Island, but unlike Spirit Island, you are fighting a losing battle. I mean, they are just coming in overwhelming numbers, and part of it, and part of the nuance of it, is that you are going to die. Your characters, your trolls, are going to die, and how you choose to have them die, and how well you can have them die. Sort of like in Champions of Midgard with the Valhalla expansion, you're getting rewarded as well for losing them in a battle. But it is a slow ebbing of the tide across the map. And so that's just the first interesting point that I'll put out there. So if that sounds interesting, let's talk more. Now, I've got a few screenshots from our game because they said, go ahead, take some screenshots, especially if you're going to talk about it. But then also they have some good concepts, pictures from the Burnt Island game website as well. And I'll kind of walk you through a little bit about what you need to know. Now, full disclaimer as well, I have not played in the Hall of the Mountain King. But from the conversation that was had about the game as we're playing it, but also from what I know about the game, having looked at it previously, because it'd been on my radar as, okay, this seems like something I would like to try at some point, but never have. It is dramatically and uniquely different. If you were not a fan of In the Hall of the Mountain King, it does not mean that you will automatically just, X off this one and not like this one. This one is different enough and it's unique enough. And I say that also, this is point number 2, as a person who doesn't really get a whole lot out of every area control game. Now, I have a few area control games in my collection. I have El Grande, I've got Rumble Nation, I've got Iwari, all 3 of which I really, really like, but I don't have a lot other. I got rid of Blood Rage. I got rid of Rising Sun. Those were not for me. I didn't back Ankh for those reasons. And so this takes a different spin on it, especially if you're not necessarily purely interested as an area control game. And some of the stuff I'm going to just highlight here will illustrate what those differences are, and so you can see a little bit firsthand what it looks like. And again, full disclaimer, at the end, we played one full round. 4-player game, one full round. And some of the concepts take a little bit of just practicing. Like, it was not as intuitive just with the rules explanation that he gave, but as we played it, it became very intuitive towards the end. So it's got a slight learning curve, but it's not anything massive by any means. So that's another pro. Let me pull up some of the images and some of the website, and so you can see exactly what I'm talking about now that I've been blabbing on too much without anything interesting in the background so far. So here is the screenshot that I took towards the beginning of the game. And what you can see here over along the right side that I'll highlight here for a second is the tableau, or the area of your what they call ancestry that you are building. And you can see that it comes and it starts off in 4x4 squares. And what you're doing is you are adding subsequent squares, I believe 3 or 4, I believe it's 4, every round to this ancestry. And that is going to be how you are building your action mechanism engine in the subsequent phase of the game. And you play it just similar to Blood Rage, if you will, just to make a loose comparison, that there are 3 ages over here, and these are the champion cards that are going to be drawn in each age. Now, what you get is you get these 5 champions that are put down here at the bottom of the board, and each of them have different abilities in how they're going to be able to help you. Some will physically be on the map as champions that will be added to your army. Others will just have special abilities that allow you to do things like, okay, I was red or pink, for example. It allows me to connect my 2 layers as if they were adjacent to each other. So not teleportation, but just like, okay, let's pretend there's a big tunnel underneath and you can move guys back and forth at no cost. Otherwise, you have to go from connection to connection. You can't skip over empty territories, for example. So you can see that these are all the icons that are on these tiles. And so what you're doing is you're drafting them. You're given those 4 tiles. You take one, you put it down, you pass. Take one, put it down, pass. And now there has to be at least one corner that overlaps with the new tile over the old tile. So it reminds me a little bit, if you have not seen one of the more recent games, Codex Naturalis, and that does a similar thing with the 4 corners of the card that are each icons or resources that you're using in order to do actions or play further cards. Now, in this case, what you're doing is you're overlaying them in order to build your ancestry of actions. And you can see the various actions. And again, at the beginning, they're a little bit unintuitive, but once you play a round or two around the table, you'll get a very good gist of things. For example, the little hammers here, that is how you advance your troops. So the other tricky thing with this is you can play, as they say, 1 major action or 2 minor actions, or in that setting, you can do a cluster of objects that are connected. So, for example, you could play 4 of these icons, of these 6, have a 2 in the center of them, meaning they are a major action, which means you get to do an action twice, but that is a major one. Or you could take, say, for example, if this was connected to here, you could take one of these gloves and one of these little hammers. And so that is the difference. However, these hammers are all touching each other. And if you have pieces that are touching, or if you have put down your little markers right here on actions already, they are considered adjacent as well with any of the markers. And so you could be doing a total of 4 advancement, because 1, 2, 3, 4. And what that means is you have the ability to move 4 troops along your supply route, essentially. It's not what it's called, but that's essentially what you're doing. The glove is forbidding on these champions down here at the bottom of the board. And the interesting thing is there, if you are the first person to bid on said champion, you can see, not very well, but there are influence along the side here. So here is a little bit of a blown up picture of some of these champions. So these champions have several features you need to know. As I mentioned, if you are the first one to bid on one of those champions with the glove action, you automatically get 1 extra influence. So if you just bid a 1 glove as a 1 bid for the champion, you're automatically going to be at the 2 influence level on that champion if you are the first one to put an icon on there. And the first one or the highest one up, if it's a tie, you go to the first one that laid there. But if you're the highest one up at the end of the round, you get this champion for subsequent rounds. Now, you'll also notice that obviously they all have special abilities, but here is the other key feature that you need to know about. They all have different unique banners of, icons in the upper left-hand corner. And that pertains to the votes that you're getting for the influence of their specific clan. So it's a little bit hard to make out, and I don't think I have a good picture of it. But up here at the very top of the board, the very top of your screen here, you can see 2 of these icons sort of up here. And these are the voting tracks. So the influence you have within each of the clans. So whenever you take over an area that is outside of your starting area. So for me, my starting area was 12 here, and this blue one up here, this frost one and this ground one. And so if I took over an area into the yellow or into this burnt sienna or the green, then I would get an influence with those clans, whether I took it over from another troll clan or if I just took it over because it was empty, or even with the gnomes in there. And so the higher you up, the higher you are up on this votes determines how many end game points you get, because on this bottom one you can't see it very well, but first place gets 12 points on that track at the very end of the third round. Second place gets 8, third place gets like 5 or 6. So it's influential in terms of points. And then there's also some end game scoring. There are also icons that we can not really go into a whole lot of detail with, but I'll blow up another picture so you can see what a more advanced board looks like here. This is one of your more advanced boards, for example. So what you have here is you have all of the different icons again. This is your gnome icon. There is a separate dial that I don't have included in those pictures where it is basically actions that you're getting. It goes around in sort of a circle and it allows some of these other actions, but it also allows you to manipulate the gnomes in your favor because, like I mentioned at the beginning, the gnomes are going to be invading the mountain at the end of every round. And so you're trying to position your troops sort of a balance between trying to conquer as many areas to get as much influence between the clans, but also to have them die glorious deaths because you get like a certain number of points for each death. But the problem is the gnomes are also going to be smart about it and they're going to want to take the path of least resistance. And so if they can avoid you, they're going to try and avoid you, which then doesn't allow you to get the bonus points by having your guys killed. But if you get too many guys killed, you're not going to be able to control some of the areas. Ergo, the balance and the puzzle and the strategic nature of it as a whole. The other icons that you have to know here, the portal purple thing is a wild, you can use as anything. The shield is the bolster. So that allows you to take and put a troop onto the board in the first place as a recruitment. It comes from your supply off of the table. So that's very helpful. And then these orange icons are your ancestry icons, I believe, something like that, but they cannot be covered up. So you have to be very careful about taking those and putting those somewhere, but they do get you end game scoring, so that's also why you want them. Now you'll also see one last icon on here, and that is the barrel. And so the barrel is how many actions you're getting per round. And so again, barrels don't do you anything during the round, but you only start off with a certain number of actions per round, and then you add the total amount of barrels that you have to that to get extra actions. So then your action supply, you may be forced then, subsequently, as a strategic option, you may be forced to take these hammers or some of these gloves as a bundle, as opposed to being able to individually put them out in order to react more to the other people on their turns and their maneuvering. So again, it's another layer to how do I want to react or what options do I have, because you're also wanting to use all of these icons or as many of these icons in every single round. Now going back to these champions for a second, almost all of the champions are going onto the map or having you get abilities in the first 2 rounds. Now there is a third set of champions that I do not have pictures of that they showed us at the end of the game that have end game scoring. So for example, it just goes at the end of the game when you're doling out who bid and who won those champions in the third round. They then are being placed on the board at the end of the round after everything is settled and allowing you to gain victory points based on the conditions that they meet. So like, okay, place this champion in a hall or in a certain area, and however many of these are around it are how many points you're going to get, or whatever is going next to it, you get this many points. So it plays a little bit differently in the last round than it does in the first 2 rounds, again, as another layer of strategy. I'll show you this picture here just because it also shows you a little bit of the end game state at the end of the first round that we ended up in. And so you can see how things are starting to get spread out. Yellow is in 3 different territories here. Blue is in 2 different territories. The gnomes have just invaded. And so you can see a little bit of everything. The gnome horde is also something that you're moving around with that gnome action that I mentioned. The last element I did not really talk about is the combat between the gnomes in the rounds and, sort of at the end of the rounds. So when you play that gnome action, for example, you get to peek at one of these little gnome icons. These gnome icons range from anywhere from 1 to 3. And so all you have to do to battle them is put your guys into an area where gnomes are. But the problem is, all it is a straight flip. So you put guys in, and you're risking it if you're putting less than 3 guys in, that it is not going to be a 3. And we had it happen both ways in our game. And so if you put 2 or 1 in, and it's higher than that, you lose, and those guys are just taken off the board. If you tie or are more, you automatically win. So putting 3 into the zone is automatically safe, but sometimes you don't have 3 to do, but you want to get that area so you can get that extra vote, or you can be next to the spawn point of the gnomes at the end of the round, so you're trying to mitigate that. The other thing you get to peek at is you can see this upper right-hand corner right below the names here, there are other gnome cards. And those are the cards that are telling you at the end of the round where the gnomes are trying to invade around the edge of the board, because you can see that there are icons around the edge of the board that represent those different zones. And along with moving this guy during the game, which allows you to manipulate where they go during the round, this is also going to tell you where you want to try and end up at the end of the round in order to get your guys to die in the glorious battle of victory points. Make sense? Sort of? Kind of? Rinse, repeat, do it for 3 rounds. So the other last aspect of the gnome term is like you get to move a certain number of enemy troops. Now let's say, for example, I am pink and I want this area right here. And so if there is a gnome right here, I can move up to I think it's 2 or 3 troops. I think it depends on what number of gnome you get, but I could be wrong on that. That's the one aspect I'm not sure of here. You can move these troops. Now you could move your troops in, but to make it easier so you don't have to worry about it, you could just move their troops out. And so you can manipulate it either way. Now you cannot manipulate it so that the yellow troops would go into the gnome zone and kill them. That is a no-no. But you can manipulate it in any other way that you'd like in terms of where you want to put them with that restriction. So there you go. So as I said at the beginning, I am not a terribly big area control fan, but this had some nuance that I definitely wasn't expecting. In the Hall of the Mountain King is more of a network and route building game with some pick up and deliver with tile placement and that sort of thing. Now, the thing you need to know as well is they said very clearly that when the Kickstarter launches, it is going to have miniatures. There are going to be miniatures for the individual units that I showed on the board, but also they're going to be bigger miniatures for those said champions that are there as well. I'm assuming, obviously, the gnomes will have some sort of marker as well. I don't remember if they said miniatures or not. Now, again, like I said, this is nothing like In the Hall of the Mountain King based on what I know, the gameplay I've watched of In the Hall of the Mountain King versus having now played Fall of the Mountain King. There is a lot more depth than I was initially expecting. Also, as a person who isn't a fan of area control, I actually enjoyed myself. And I enjoyed that ancestry tile pattern building, that element of things. I think we all agreed, those of us who were playing it at that game, that was something, especially in an area control situation, we really hadn't seen. Like I said before, I've seen it in a couple other games like Codex Naturalis, with the overlaying of the corners in terms of the resource management, but especially with how you're then using them even after, as was said at the end of the session, looking back on it, I mean, we just kind of haphazardly played those tiles onto each other, and he said, looking back on it, you would probably lay those tiles down in a completely different way than you did before, and I agreed completely. Now, knowing what I knew about it. Now, would I use them the same way? I would probably use them differently as well each time too, because not only is the grouping going to matter, but again, reacting to what other people are doing. And there is an element of take that, and you could do some more take that in this game, but it's also easy to avoid it because there's just so much going on that you're having to physically worry about on your own, that if you focus on some of the other people's stuff, it could be a detriment to you. The end game scoring, the end round scoring is somewhat interesting as well, depending on how many domains you own and how many different domains you're in. You're getting certain bonus points there too. I didn't get a good sense of that. I just don't remember how it was actually done. So I can't really speak to more of that side of things. But All in all, I liked the champion abilities. We didn't have a chance to use many of the champion abilities because you only start off with one, and then you only get them after rounds 1 and 2, and then at the very end for scoring. So that is the other element. And then, as you saw with those other progressive screenshots that I showed at the end of the round, like there are a ton of gnomes invading, like I said at the beginning of the video. Like it is just this slaughter and swarm that comes on, and you can see that there are multiple gnomes then on an area. So then you all of a sudden go from that 1 to 3 range that I talked about, needing potentially anywhere from 2 to 6, where that peaking ability at what the gnome is really then can be a little bit more useful, as opposed to the first round where you're kind of like, there's only one there, I'll take my risk. And, for blessing and curse, it sometimes worked in your favor and sometimes bit you. So that's just another element of things that I thought was very interesting. Now, is this going to appeal to everybody? I don't know. And my biggest concern is price point. With all these deluxeifications, like in the Hall of the Mountain King when they ran it on Kickstarter, the price was more significant. And when we talk about games in the area control sense, how is this going to compare? Obviously, it is significantly different than a lot of other things I've played in this sense, in the combination of mechanics, in a good way. But with all of those deluxeifications, is it going to be worth it to get it on Kickstarter? And I don't know. That's going to be the interesting thing. They didn't tell us price point. They didn't give us anything else in terms of pledge levels or expansions or anything like that. So I can't speak to any of that either. But having played it, it was one of those where I really kind of wanted to see it. And now having seen it, I hate to say, like, I'm more interested now. Now, am I going to back it for sure? I don't know. Because again, it's not a huge mechanic that I often favor on my table. But it's giving me enough thought that I'm seriously going to be looking at it much more serious than I would have told you prior to playing this. So, more of an FYI than anything else. Okay. That's it. Those are my thoughts. Those are my early impressions, early review-ish comments. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And there you go. Hope that was helpful. Like I said, it's launching on June 1. What's the price point going to be? What's it going to end up like? We'll just kind of have to wait and see. I'm going to do the same just along with you guys as well. So, there you go. As always, if you liked it, shoot me a sub. More where that came from in the future. As always, stay classy. Hope to see you around.